When we think of classic westerns, we almost always picture spotless cowboys and indigenous peoples turned into faceless villains. But a closer look at historical sources shows that reality took a very different path. In many indigenous nations, women held positions of prestige, took part in collective decision-making, and were recognized for skills ranging from diplomacy to sustaining the village, a sharp contrast to the rigid roles forced on European women at the time. As we dive deeper into these cultures, Hollywood stereotypes start to fall apart. These were complex societies with rituals, kinship systems, and their own economies, where women's roles weren't secondary. They were essential. This caught the attention of the founding fathers of the United States. Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson closely observed the Iroquois Confederacy and saw in its political organization a model for the emerging democratic project. Among the Iroquois, councils of elder women could appoint or remove chiefs, decide on alliances, and lead ceremonies that kept the community united. Meanwhile, men took on visible public roles, but never without the approval of the women leaders. This social system, built on a balance of responsibilities, helped the tribes endure wars, migrations, and negotiations with colonial powers for centuries. Understanding these stories reveals the challenges faced by millions of indigenous women throughout history. Challenges that, despite many changes, still echo today. In the next few minutes, we'll turn more pages of this narrative and look beyond the dusty frames of old movies. Around the campfires of the remote Kaga tribe, a young man's first big challenge wasn't hunting or defeating rivals. It was making it through the night with the most respected elder woman of the clan. The rule was simple. She had to wake up satisfied. If he failed, the young man would return to his mentors to revisit lessons on desire and care before trying again. In that world, women set the pace for alliances. They chose partners, sealed pacts, and led the conversations that kept the village in constant motion. But not all young men handled that level of female initiative very well. When the attention got overwhelming, some would slip away into the forest, hiding out in secret burrows they had dug ahead of time. All it took was one to go missing, and the huntresses would form patrols, track fresh footprints, and bring the runaway back before the first birds started singing, rekindling the courtship game that shaped everyday life in the community. That power didn't end in the straw bed. In the clashes that marked the westward expansion across the Great Plains, writers recorded Omaha, Cheyenne, Ponca, and Sioux women warriors wielding spears and rifles alongside their fathers and brothers. When Texas Ranger patrols ran into Comanche bands, they found it impossible to tell who was who in the heat of battle. Behind long braids were fighters who preferred ambushes to retreats and refused to surrender under any circumstance. Soldiers told stories, teeth chattering, that fighting these women was like going up against the wind itself, invisible, unpredictable, and always ready to change direction. In the heart of the Great Plains, the indigenous wars of the 19th century revealed figures capable of changing the course of history. Among them stands out the Cheyenne woman remembered as Ten-O Nails. Tradition says that during the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, her arrow, followed by a gunshot, brought down General George Custer, paving the way for one of the rare native victories against the United States Army. Years later, Captain Robert Custer described in a letter the shock of facing another warrior. She fought with the ferocity of a tigress, switching between bow and revolver with cold precision. Moments like these show that in the heat of combat, any idea of female fragility disappeared. No one would dare tell those women their place was in the kitchen. That same autonomy showed up in domestic life. While monogamy was common, polygamy was accepted. A man happy with his first wife could, without scandal, ask for his sister-in-law's hand. The custom echoes an old story about two sisters who lived alone until they were visited by a man who came down from the sky. He taught them how to grow corn and cook, and his presence came to justify households with 3 adults. Courage, disruption, and unique social codes weave through these stories, reminding us that cultural boundaries were fluid, and that heroes could show up in unexpected forms, armed with a bow, a revolver, and the voice of their people. And every time these memories come back, they challenge who gets to record the great battles and who stays in the shadows, inviting us to hear the echo of forgotten voices. Among many indigenous peoples of North America, family structure went beyond what we call marriage. When there were few men or a need to control births, a woman could take on the role of a temporary wife, avoiding the status of being single and childless, something the group saw as unfavorable. Life as a couple followed practical guidelines. Young people would share a hut to test the relationship. If it didn't work out, each person would just gather their things and move on. That kind of freedom, something the West wouldn't adopt in civil marriages until well into the second half of the 20th century, had already been part of indigenous life for generations. It's worth noting that these norms varied from nation to nation, but the core idea of adapting relationships to the needs of the moment stayed the same. European colonizers quickly realized how much value was placed on women, so they started capturing them to stop fights and force agreements, exploiting the symbolic weight women held within the village. Women's autonomy also showed up in divorce. If a hunter came back and saw his belongings piled up outside, he got the message with no need for a conversation. His partner had ended the relationship. Complaining was pointless. All he could do was take what was his and often start over at his mother's place, while the clan kept its social balance. These practices, which might sound unusual today, reveal communities that shaped intimate bonds around collective needs, upholding flexibility and a strong sense of community that rarely get the spotlight in traditional narratives. Start by picturing the scene. In some tribes of the Old West, the groom spent the first 2 years of marriage living with his mother-in-law. During that time, he had to prove he could protect his wife, especially during the most delicate moment of all, childbirth. The health of the mother and baby was everyone's business, and if anything went wrong, the blame fell on the husband's shoulders. But the pressure didn't stop there. Women were expected to get pregnant again every 4 years, an interval seen as ideal for keeping the group strong. If more time passed, the elder women would step in, demanding answers, digging into the couple's habits, diets, even beliefs, searching for a reason behind the delay. These days, a lot of people assume native communities were rough or unrefined, but the culture clash tells a different story. Just look at the colonizers. Clothes above all, bathing almost never. For the 17th century pilgrims, being clean meant wearing fabric without stains. The smell underneath was tolerated as part of everyday life, just like lice or fleas crawling along the collar. Smelling like a horse? A must-have in a cowboy's scent profile. The root of that mindset had a lot to do with religion. Around 1620, some saints preached that physical discomfort was a path to salvation, even avoiding water until open sores appeared. On the other hand, native peoples bathed in rivers and lakes whenever they could, making bathing part of their daily rituals. Seeing so much water running over the wrong skin horrified many Europeans, who labeled the habit savage, even as they carried layers of built-up grime under their own clothes. And just like that, it became clear who was really keeping their body, and the land, clean. When the first Europeans arrived in the Americas, they came across an indigenous custom that challenged their faith, diving naked into rivers to cleanse both body and spirit. Raised by doctrines that linked exposed skin to sin, the colonists saw the scene as sacrilegious. But a few centuries later, the Old World itself turned back to public waters, and Hollywood films turned waterfalls into altars of adventure. What once seemed forbidden is now romanticized, a reminder that values flow and shift like the course of a river. Even through epidemics, displacement, and conflict, indigenous women kept up care routines that caught the attention of travelers. Photos from the late 19th century show leather cloaks, fringes swaying in the wind, beads mapping out clans, and embroidery recording stories without needing written words. Items once treated as museum curiosities now inspire fashion designers searching for authenticity on the runway. Like a river, the trend may change course, but it carries the legacy of peoples who never turned away from their reflection in the water. Those same portraits reveal bone piercings, polished metal rings, chokers made of plant fibers, and scents crafted from local seed oils. Nothing was just decoration. Every piece marked life stages, sealed alliances, or called on spiritual protection. Even the shampoo, made from mashed tree bark, told the story of the forest that provided it. Anyone paying close attention can see there's still so much to discover on the edges of the narrative. And the river's next bend promises to uncover secrets hidden beneath the dark green surface. Among indigenous communities across the Americas, a deep connection with nature went hand in hand with taboos that shaped women's everyday lives. During the menstrual cycle, for example, women were kept away from shared spaces during mealtimes. Elders tell the story of Waisaka, a young warrior who once raised his arm to stop his own grandmother from sitting around the fire. He feared her impurity might provoke divine anger and put the whole family at risk. The moment lives on as a symbolic warning about the invisible power tied to blood, and how purity rules govern social life. That experience, though, varied depending on the way of life. In settled villages, where farming ensured food supplies and the community had a fixed home, women helped tend crops, had a voice in councils, and earned greater respect. Among nomadic groups, tents came down with every move, and women carried not only baskets and hides but also the responsibility of cooking, sewing, setting up shelters, and calming the children. While they could vote in the selection of chiefs, many were treated as extensions of their husbands. For older women, the journey was even harder. With less strength to keep up on long treks, they received smaller portions and almost no privileges, seen by the tribe as extra weight. Survival of the group came first. During times of scarce hunting or long droughts, midwives turned to herbal infusions, smoke rituals, and ceremonial abstinence to delay pregnancies. The goal wasn't to reject life, but to balance mouths and resources until nature was generous again. So, becoming pregnant, or not, became a strategic choice, weighed between the need to protect the group and the duty not to go beyond what the land could provide. In this back and forth of belief and pragmatism, women held together the bond that sustained the tribe, even when the personal cost was high. When the colonizers arrived, the daily lives of women in settled tribes were turned upside down. Indigenous men saw advantages in the new leaders and started trading wives and daughters like goods. The practice of lending women to outsiders grew stronger, seen as a gesture of hospitality, almost like offering a peace pipe. For chiefs and warriors, the birth of a child with a white father sealed alliances and could bring protection. Among the Cree, choosing young girls to live temporarily with European traders became a common practice. Even though it ignored the wishes of the girls, this strategy opened doors for trade deals and, in some cases, led to official marriages. A paradox took hold. Emotional relationships, often without consent, became political bridges. Some colonizers integrated so deeply that they ended up defending the interests of the village itself, while husbands and fathers, worn down by internal conflicts, saw giving up their women as a way to ease pressure overnight. Many believed no conflict with native groups could be resolved without involving women. That belief only fueled the cycle. Each new agreement deepened economic dependency and the hope of survival in a land that was quickly changing under foreign laws. But beneath every deal lay the silence of voices that rarely got to choose their fate, yet whose presence was seen as the key to any negotiation. Did you know that the United States used to be home to over 2,000 indigenous nations, and today only a little more than 500 remain? Most of these communities live on scattered reservations, mainly across the vast American West, and rarely reach the East Coast. Among them, the Cherokee stand out, with a population of over 300,000 people, and the Navajo with around 220,000 members. Numbers that alone show the cultural resilience of these peoples. But the landscape goes far beyond the two biggest names. The Sioux and Chippewa each have around 100,000 members too, yet they still face a major challenge: federal recognition. In recent years, over 150 groups have applied for this status through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but only a tiny portion has been successful. Being officially recognized means being treated as a sovereign nation, with the right to manage land, pass laws, and even create a tax system. It sounds like a path to autonomy, but the process is still slow, technical, and packed with requirements. Meanwhile, everyday life on the reservations is tough. Unemployment is persistent. Many homes lack reliable electricity, and schools often don't have enough resources. The land is sometimes poor for farming, which makes healthy food expensive, reflected in high rates of diabetes, obesity, and mortality. Even where sovereignty exists on paper, the daily challenge is turning hard-won rights into real quality of life, and that journey is far from over. For many Indigenous youth, the horizon within the reservations has shrunk. Leaving often means moving to urban centers or joining the workforce in casinos, which now support many tribes since gambling on tribal land is exempt from federal taxes. Still, some choose to stay. Young people who carve wood, bead by hand, and keep their ancestors' memory alive, thread by thread. Even so, the exodus keeps growing. The promise of a steady paycheck, education, and basic care pulls the younger generation away. Coming back becomes a holiday visit. Each departure silences a song, a language, a ritual. If this pace doesn't change, we won't just lose traditions. We'll lose the voices that tell the story of this continent. Share, subscribe, and join us in keeping this heritage alive. Your support makes a difference. See you next time.